Right then, hello everybody. So it's 1 minute past 3. Those that are going to join us have probably joined us by now. We'll probably have a few stragglers, but firstly, hello everybody. Let's get this party started, as they say. Thanks for your patience. Firstly, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whichever works best for you, really. I know we have people from far and wide as ever, and it's a pleasure having you all here. I'm Alan Walker, your host for today. But before we get too far in, I wanted to thank everyone for their support so far of the launch of ChatTalent.com. The support's been amazing. The amount of traffic we're getting, the positive feedback has been mind-blowingly good. And more importantly, those that have either produced or helped us to produce some great content for ChatTalent have been absolute superstars. I couldn't ask for any more from people. And that thanks includes today's speaker for our very first webinar under the new official ChatTalent.com banner, Ben Slater, who's the VP of Growth for Beamery. Ben's going to talk to us today about treating candidates more like customers and less like units in a process or cats that need herding, so to speak. And amongst other things, he'll cover off why this is becoming important, discuss how candidates have changed their approaches to researching companies, what you need to think about, and of course some of the how to this stuff as well. And we'll be getting through a lot in a short space of time, but we'll hopefully have room for questions at the end. If you have any, the best way for these to be heard are by submitting them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not via the chat option, as I'll miss them if you pose them in there. And I'll field these and ask Ben the questions on your behalf. We have a lot of people joining us today, and if we open up the mics, it'll be chaos. So we'll get through as many as we can, but we will. My promise to you, as ever, is we'll be wrapping up bang on time. So without further ado, enough of my jibber jabber. Mr. Slater, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Alan. I guess before we dive in, I just want to say a quick thanks to you for having me on. I think what you're doing with ChatTalent is really awesome. So excited to be a part of it and excited to kind of share some of the thoughts and feelings we have over at Beamery. I'm going to share my screen now. So let me know if everyone can see this, and I'll go into present mode. Perfect. So I know everyone's on mute.
Working my end, Ben.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan. So yeah, I guess let's start with the easy question. Who am I? So as Alan said, I'm Ben Slater. I run marketing growth at Beamery. Before we kind of dive into today's subject matter, which is all around treating candidates like customers, I can give a tiny bit of background on Beamery for anyone that's not familiar with our company. So we are a recruitment, CRM, and marketing software, which means we really deal with everything that happens before the application. So that might be building your brand and attracting talent. It could be sourcing and engaging passive candidates. It could be building pipelines for the future. It could be nurturing those silver medalists. So we're really focused on helping companies be a lot more proactive around the way that they approach recruiting. And we're lucky enough to work with some really interesting, challenging, and exciting organizations as well. So the matter in question, treating candidates like customers, something we actually say a lot over at Beamery. We're pretty boring internally. We walk around saying these nice catchphrases to each other. Relationships, not resumes, is another one. But for me, it comes down to this. So people don't really wander around either online or offline as a candidate or as a customer. It's really the same thing. People are people. There's no distinction. Now, this is slightly problematic for recruiters in one particular way. Marketers have got incredibly good at creating deeply personalized experiences for us while we are in that kind of consumer mode. If you think about the companies that are incredibly successful nowadays, they all put the customer right at the center of everything that they're doing. Want to book a taxi? You'll have one outside in 5 seconds, clicking a button on Uber. Want to watch the entire season of House of Cards? Again, just a couple of clicks away. Now, I can give you an example, I guess, a personal example of where this became particularly apparent a couple of weeks ago. So I booked a trip to Brussels, and went onto Skyscanner as you do, booked some flights, and then went onto Booking.com to try and find somewhere to stay. Now, Booking.com already knew exactly where I was going, the dates that I was going, the number of people, and they knew that it was, one boy, one girl, and so they were suggesting kind of romantic places. Now, some might say that's creepy, but to me, that just kind of shows the level of personalization that we can expect on the internet right now. So all of this is leading to a kind of fundamental change in the way that candidates approach jobs, a fundamental change in the candidate psyche. So I like this quote from Matt Charney. In recruiting today, it's not only recruiters that are doing the research, with 85% of job searches starting with a search engine. Top talent is searching for a company the same way they would any other purchasing decision. The way that we think about applying to jobs is deeply changing. It's becoming a lot more similar to the way people buy products. Now, the issue with that is we've obviously already touched on the kind of personalized experience people get when they do try and purchase things. This is slightly at odds with what happens in many situations when they apply for jobs. So these stats are all over the internet, and I'll just read a couple out. So nearly 60% of candidates have had a poor candidate experience. 72% of those share their bad experience online. 85% of job seekers doubt that a human has ever even reviewed their application when they don't hear back. And candidates who are not informed of the status or decision of their application are much, much less likely to reapply to that company in the future. So what we are doing right now, the current state of affairs, is not only a jarring contrast, but it's really damaging our company brands and our ability to compete for the best candidates. So what needs to change? A couple of things on a high level. We need to take that personalized experience that marketing departments are providing customers and apply it to recruiting. We need to make sure that communication is relevant. We need to make sure that we are providing consistent value throughout the process. And we need to be prepared to meet candidates kind of anywhere, anytime, whether that's on social media, whether that's at a careers fair, on our website, prompt replies to emails. We have to be always on and always thinking about the experience that someone is having with our company. So, what does this mean in practice? How can you start to think about this? Well, let's start at the beginning. So how does someone come across your brand? And actually, let's change that. We are talking about candidates and customers. So let's think about how someone first thinks about buying a product. I don't know about you guys, but this is where most of my buying cycles start, right? Trawling through Amazon reviews from people I've never met, have no idea if they have anything in common with me. We might have completely different interests, but I put so much validation around the things that other people say, and as a species, we all do this, right? And this is really translating to recruiting, right? So when a candidate is first thinking about your company, first thinking about whether to apply, they're on Glassdoor or they're looking at social media. They're talking to their friends about, whether your company has a good reputation. They're trying to find out everything that they can. And if you have negative stuff out there in the market, it's really going to impact your ability to attract the very best people for your organization. Now, this is really just first contact, this is really just the start of the process now. The way that people buy products in general has changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. People want to have control of the entire buying process. They want to be able to educate themselves on, whether buying Alexa from Amazon is a good thing or not, as opposed to just kind of jumping straight to the purchase button. And it's no different when it comes to applying for jobs. Very rarely do people arrive at your careers page ready to apply, and obviously this is particularly true of passive candidates. Sam Ramsey, who heads up resourcing over at Balfour Beatty, has a really great analogy to describe kind of what's currently wrong and how she thinks it's changed. So she's from a retail background, and she likens kind of traditional application processes to taking someone in your store straight to the checkout process. You haven't given them a chance to browse the aisles. You haven't given them a chance to kind of go over and have a look at different products. You're asking them to buy, or in this case, apply, without even telling them why. Now, what she says we should be doing instead is, walking candidates through the store, showing them the different products, establishing trust, marketing to them, and then taking to the checkout. And this is a way that we can get a much higher ROI from the way that we're currently thinking around that front end of the recruiting process. Now, as you can see on the screen, this journey is not necessarily linear. Someone doesn't just walk into your store or your careers page, click on a few different pieces of content, and then go over and click apply. Often this is drawn out over months or years. They're dancing around, reading different pieces of content online, following your company on LinkedIn, registering for a talent network, maybe signing up to an event, and then eventually applying. Now, the important part throughout all of this is that you are making sure that you're continually engaging them, continually helping them find the right kind of content for where they are in the process, whether they're early on, whether they are maybe thinking a little bit more seriously about your organization, or whether they're maybe ready to apply. Make sure that you're kind of furnishing them with the right material to help them kind of accelerate themselves through the process. Shout out to BT in general, by the way, who are doing some super interesting things around the entire recruiting process, and using Beamery to do it. They're doing some super cool stuff. Right, so I love this phrase because I think this really hits at a kind of core human trait that we all have, and that recruiters are really starting to leverage. As humans in general, human nature, we like to be individuals, but we also like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Whether that's a church, whether that's a sports team, whether that's an online group of people who like Nike trainers. Everyone wants to be part of something. And I think recruiters are starting to get really good at tapping into this. They start to understand that even if someone isn't necessarily looking for a job, they might be interested in hearing more about your company. They might be interested in learning a little bit more about the industry. They might be willing to build some kind of a relationship. And what we're talking about here is kind of good, consistent, relevant information delivered to candidates that helps them understand, why your company is a good fit for them. It helps them understand exactly what it is that you do. It helps them understand, why they should give up a significant portion of their working life and come to your organization. And one of the ways that we like to visualize that at Beamery is with this idea of the candidate lifetime value. So over time, the relationship between yourself and a candidate strengthens through engagement, through them, learning more about your organization, their value to you increases. Now, this might culminate in them becoming an employee. It might culminate in them becoming an advocate of your company and referring, their friends or colleagues. It might even just refer in them or end in them being an avid retweeter of your content. But the point here is that over time, investing in that relationship is giving you a lot more back than just a simple application. It's really a little bit more fundamental than that. Now, all of this treating candidates like customers, it's not just about the candidate experience. At the end of the day, it's also around getting a competitive advantage when it comes to recruiting. So hiring usually relies on a moment of serendipity where a candidate happens to be looking, happens to be active in the market, and comes across one of your jobs at a time where they are, interested in exploring an option like that. Now, obviously, that's leaving quite a lot up to chance, and there aren't that many of those active job seekers wandering around the internet. There are a lot more people who are, currently happy in their career and aren't actively looking for new employment. So borrowing some of these tactics from marketing, thinking about building a pipeline, thinking about being more proactive with your recruiting strategy and marketing to candidates that aren't ready to move right now, gives you a much wider audience and means that you never really have to start from scratch when you're hiring for a new role. You already have a whole load of engaged candidates that you can kind of dip into. And you also get the same insights that, sales and marketing leaders rely on when they're kind of planning future investments, you understand because you already have a pipeline that it's going to take a certain investment in advertising, or a certain investment in events, or a certain investment in sourcing to get you to where you need to be regarding headcount over the next 6, 12, 24 months. I've really kind of rattled through this, but I want to leave a lot of time for kind of general questions and discussion. I wanted to leave everyone with this though, and this is a stat that I find pretty terrifying around kind of what's been happening over the last 15 years. 52% of Fortune 500 companies that we see as kind of perennials that aren't going anywhere, have disappeared, and the average life expectancy is dramatically lower than what it was 60 years ago. And I think if that says one thing to us, it's that whether it comes to candidates or whether it's customers, the rules of engagement are changing. People expect very different things when they engage with your company, and that if we don't adapt, if we don't change, then I think we're going to get left behind. So, Alan, I promised I'd be nice and quick. How's that?
That was perfect, Ben. Very succinct, to the point, but equally very insightful and very useful. So what I'm going to do now, I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you. So what I want to say is to the audience, if you can start lining up your questions through the Q&A while we work through some of the questions I've got. We've got plenty of time, so we can cover off a fair amount. So as before, click on the Q&A button. It's either at the bottom of your screen or the bottom, depending on browser, and then it should flash up and you can fire your questions into there. So Ben, why do you think that recruitment marketing is such a hot topic right now? What's been the tipping point? Why is it suddenly the flavor of the year rather than even flavor of the month?
Yeah, it's absolutely a flavor of the year. I think a big part of it comes down to this idea of what is happening in the world in general, and the changing expectations that we have around what our relationship with a company should look like. Now, what that means is that people are no longer applying in the way that they used to. They want more of a relationship with a company, and recruitment marketing, I guess, provides the tools and the framework to deliver that kind of new relationship. I think the other part of it is that recruiting teams are getting a lot more sophisticated, and they're looking for new ways to get a competitive advantage over other companies. And I think that being a lot more proactive and going after the talent that really can make a dramatic difference to your company is a great way of doing that.
Excellent. And it's obvious, because clearly you've just spoken about it here. You've pointed out there's a lot of similarities between recruiting, or the modern way of recruiting certainly, and marketing. Are there any major differences? Is it more nuanced than just a direct comparison?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Alan. So I think it's an easy comparison to make, but I think it is absolutely more nuanced than that. There are many kind of lessons or tactics that recruiters can borrow from marketers to, get a lot of this stuff done. But recruiters aren't marketers, and recruiters are also have a day job, right? They have a huge load of recs that they need to fill. They have, a lot of internal pressure to move quickly, get more things done, and they don't necessarily have the time to start building out nurture campaigns and creating different kinds of content. So I think that's where partnering with technology that can ease the burden can be really helpful. I think the other difference is that in sales and marketing, you want everyone to become a customer. Whereas in recruiting, you don't want everyone to apply. You want the people that you need to apply. You want quality applications. You want to build relationships with quality candidates who are a good fit for the kind of things you're trying to do. So I think that it's incredibly important for brands to think about, segmentation, not just in terms of the way that they are investing in different kind of campaigns, but also in the way that they are engaging the candidates they already have, whether those are people that they've sourced, whether those are people that they've picked up from the ATS, silver medalists that might have applied in the past, whether they're people that have come through from events or similar marketing campaigns. It's very important to make sure that you're only reaching out to people, or you have a different engagement strategy for people that could be really high value versus people who are maybe just people to keep in a general marketing campaign.
And you talked there about how technology can help internal recruitment teams. Do you think there's also a need for them to reconfigure how those teams are set up?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's something that over the next few years we're gonna learn a lot more about this. We've seen already a lot of teams start to really separate talent acquisition and recruiting. So obviously sourcing teams have existed for quite a long time already. But what we're really seeing as a supplement to sourcing are people who are devoted to marketing to talent, or employer branding or events, and that really being a separate function within the recruiting team from the people who are doing a lot of the interviews and processing of applicants. And I think that kind of initial split is probably the first change we'll see. And then I think over time we will definitely see kind of more specialized roles being created within the recruiting department. A lot of the customers that we work with have hired marketers from, or brought people across from their marketing team directly into the recruiting department to manage a lot of these systems and processes, because it really does require a kind of owner if you want to do it really effectively.
Mm. No, I agree entirely. The work I do with my other hat on, the talent finder's hat on, is often in and around that space. It's understanding now that the recruitment teams need to be more multi-skilled than maybe they were 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. That's great. And I think I kind of know your answer to this, Ben, because you probably wouldn't be doing what you're doing now if the answer was a yes. Do you think this is a fad? Or is it something that's going to be the future of recruitment?
Well, yeah, as you said, I probably wouldn't be doing what I am doing over at Beamery if I thought it was a short-lived thing. I mean, I think for me, society in general is changing so fast now. People, if you think about the iPhone and what that gives us access to, it gives us transport, it gives us music, it gives us food, all a kind of few clicks away. And I think that as a society, we're becoming very used to almost like a on-demand economy. Everything is always there, always on, always ready. And I think we really lose patience with people who or organizations that don't kind of quite match up to those expectations. So I think that's a big reason why this is here to stay. The other, I think, is just, as organizations see the value from these kind of initiatives, I think it's going to be hard for them to go back to what they were doing before. And
again, for these recruitment teams who are looking at how they need to change and how they need to reconfigure themselves, do you think that recruitment team needs to get buy-in from a marketing department? Do they need to work in partnership?
Well, I think it kind of depends on the goals. I think that often a big blocker for recruiting teams who are trying to do this kind of stuff is content creation, because they just don't have the capacity in-house to create that content themselves. And I think that's where partnering with marketing can be very valuable. And I think that there's always a lot of content that can kind of be, or existing content that can be reframed or reorganized for talent purposes. And I think that's where recruiting teams should start. And then I think that the other part is making sure that everyone in the organization is on the same page and everyone understands the importance of getting this stuff right from the talent perspective, not just from the commercial perspective.
Okay. And I know from talking to recruitment colleagues that sometimes getting that buy-in is easier said than done. Have you got any tips at all in terms of how they go about doing that? I guess as ever, if you want buy-in, you've got to demonstrate value to the person you're trying to get buy-in from. So is there any tips around that?
I think that's an incredibly good point there, Alan. And because this whole idea of recruitment marketing is relatively new, I think one of the areas where recruiting teams struggle is they don't know what metrics to point to show that the things that they're doing now are working, right? It's not as simple as time to hire, because everything that you're doing now is focused on, or a lot of the things you're doing now are focused on everything that happens before the application, right? So what are those new metrics that are becoming important? And I think, one of the things that we try and do as a platform is provide companies with that kind of data, which they can then take to, the C-suite and say, hey, look, event is working because, I can see not only kind of how many new leads have come through, but also the fact that those people are translating into hires. Those people are, helping us hit our diversity objectives. I can actually see the ROI. And I think that's something that is incumbent upon the software providers to tackle correctly, because otherwise it's very hard for people to go internally and fight for budget. If all I'm saying is, I'm increasing LinkedIn followers, or, we're getting this amount of views on the careers page, what does that mean? It's kind of like a vanity metric. I think we have to go deeper, and the vendors have to enable recruiters to go deeper.
And of course, there's some great examples of organisations like Virgin, for example, who are turning candidates into actual customers through their recruitment processes. So actually, the two things can meet in the middle, depending on your brand and what it is you do as an organisation. Excellent, thanks for that. Now I'm going to go to some of the questions from the audience. We've got a few lined up here. I'm not going to do these in any particular order. So the first question is a good one from Sarah Wright. She said you highlighted that the review market we interact with across all decision making, and how important that is nowadays. And she wonders how would a company deal with negative company reviews, and how best do we deal with this?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think that the simple answer is it's more important to deal with it. That the act of dealing with it is more important than kind of how you deal with it. I think nothing looks worse than a whole load of negative reviews without any comments from the recruiting team. So what I would recommend is, having someone in your team who is responsible for looking after, your Glassdoor page, and checking, on a weekly or a daily basis, depending on the volume of reviews you get, what is coming in, and being on hand to write a quick response to people. Because I think a lot of the time when people leave a negative review, it's because they felt like they haven't been heard during the process. And I think that only compounds if you then leave that review out online, and they're probably going to go and then do kind of more offline damage if you don't deal with it.
It's good. It's a really good point. You say it often, don't you, on things like the Play Store on Android and Amazon. There will be negativity, but actually when there's a response, even if it's a fairly vanilla response, it adds some weight to what people are saying, I think. Absolutely. So here's a really good one, Ben. So my client base primarily is in-house recruitment teams, and I believe yours is as well. But there are still tens of thousands of agency recruiters just here in the UK alone. Do you have any advice for recruiters who are working within a recruitment agency? They're only part of the job cycle for a relatively short period of time, and the rules are different on their side of the fence, so to speak. What can they do around recruitment marketing to improve their outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's another really great question. I think, again, with agencies, it's incredibly important to have that relationship in place, because you want to be the person that a candidate calls when they are unhappy with their job. So keeping them engaged in a way that isn't intrusive, reminding them that you're there, and being on hand to help when they have a problem is kind of, I guess, what you should shoot for. So it's really around kind of taking care of your Rolodex, I guess, would be the best way of putting it. It's not rocket science, but I think that it's becoming even more important than it ever was.
And I guess it's harder for agencies to market your traditional careers and employee value proposition and stuff for every single client of theirs. But what they can do is talk about their value as an agency and use similar technology, if not Beamery, to do a similar thing. I don't know whether you guys have done anything with recruitment agencies, but certainly there are solutions out there. There are more generalist marketing that might well fit the bill for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of a story about one of these incredibly successful car salesmen, and all he did was he kept a list of everyone that ever engaged with him. He kept a list of their birthdays, and all he did in terms of new business was sending out birthday cards to all of these different potential customers. And in a beautiful way, it's not obtrusive. It shows that someone cares to remember, and it kind of reminds them that when they do want to buy a car, which is something that people do kind of every couple of years in the same way that people change jobs, that you're there and you're the person who has thought about the relationship. So that's something. I mean, there are a bunch of services that automate things like that. I'm not going to suggest that every recruitment agency should fire out tens of thousands of cards every year, but it's a good way of thinking about it, I think.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes those real simple personal touches make a massive difference. People can often overcomplicate things without doing the basics. And some of the value you can get out of those things that are very easy to manage and very easy to deliver can be astronomical. Another great question here. So somebody here is, and they're an anonymous attendee, so I don't know their name, unfortunately, but he or she has said that their company has let them enroll onto a recruitment / talent acquisition qualification. So I'm assuming they're either a junior recruiter or a HR person who's looking to do more recruiting, or just a recruiter who's upskilling. Do you think it would be worth them looking at a marketing qualification either instead or as well as to support with their activities?
Yeah, another great question. Ton of great questions, Aaron. So kudos to everyone who's here. So I guess the simple answer is yes, it's only going to help. I think it's valuable to do both because, as we touched on earlier, recruiting and marketing has a lot of similarities, but it is a kind of nuanced comparison. But I think that in the future, the most effective or the best recruiters are going to be people who have a really good fundamental understanding of a lot of the concepts that a junior marketer or a mid-level marketer is bread and butter for them.
Exactly. Good. Really interesting question here, and I'll let you answer first, but I may pipe in on this one. So somebody with the username K Beeler has asked them, how do you suggest we deal with the phrase legacy hiring managers with this new way of thinking that candidates are customers? So I'm guessing the hiring managers have traditionally treated candidates in the way that we are saying they shouldn't be anymore. And how do you get them on side with the new way of working and treating candidates in a different way?
Yeah, I think if possible, the best way of doing it is to, I guess, show them what happens when you improve the quality of the candidate experience versus when candidates don't have a good time during the application process. Because what they should see is increased engagement, better quality candidates at interview, less drop off, better offer acceptance. And I think if you can make the argument in words or terms that they understand, but also they care about, i.e. having good people for their team, that's where you might have some success. I think whenever you're trying to talk about these kind of things with internal stakeholders, you have to put it in a language that they speak, that they understand. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere quick.
No, exactly. And I think, if you talk to somebody who's highly commercial, you can talk about time to hire, the cost of having an empty seat because it takes too long, the cost per hire and all of those kind of things. And there's various metrics that you can use depending on the audience. I think if you're dealing with a comms or a marketing team, you talk about brand and reputation and those kind of things. And it's just finding their pain point and using their language, isn't it, ultimately?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Paul Wilson's asked if there was one key takeaway or starting point to kind of moving towards this approach and building a strategy, what would that be? What would you advise an organisation beyond buying Beamery?
well, obviously that would be recommendation number one. No, I'm joking. I think the best way to start this is literally with an empty whiteboard and a pen and mapping out what you want the candidate experience or that whole candidate journey to look like. You know, when someone first interacts with your company, how do you want them to feel? You know, if someone applies for a job and drops out of the process, what do you want to happen to them? If, you know, you turn someone down, but you'd like to keep in contact with them, how do you want that to look? And I think that just by almost stepping back from the process and kind of thinking about this stuff almost from first principles, that's where you can understand the kind of, firstly, the low-hanging fruit, the things that you can change easily. And then secondly, you can work out kind of what is going to make a massive impact for your business and what are you going to be able to take to you know, other stakeholders and say, hey, look, I want to do this because of X, Y, and Z.
Good. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here. If you want any support with that kind of thing, we do exactly that for things like employer brand, for marketing, anything in that space. If you want a few hours of my time, just drop me a line. I'm more than happy to talk to you around that. So that's my shameless plug out of the way. Question here from Pete. He's saying he's very reassured that someone is taking the candidate journey piece very seriously, but in his opinion, the kind of relationship side of recruitment over the last few years has actually gone downhill rather than improved. Do you see, are we on the cusp of there being a reversal in that? Are we genuinely seeing enough good examples of best practice that it's going to make a difference to the majority of candidates?
Yeah, I think it's again another interesting question. I think all of this depends slightly on the type of hiring that we're talking around, because there are different challenges to recruiting teams based on what they're trying to do. So when it comes to a relationship, the challenge that you know, an executive recruiter who is maybe trying to fill 2 or 3 roles a year faces compared to someone who is you know, in a volume hiring role and is trying to fill, you know, tens of thousands is very different. And therefore the way that they have to try and provide a kind of personalized experience is again very different. So I guess what I would say is that, again, you need to think about what good looks like for your organization, and then you need to try and find the technology that's going to enable you to do that at the scale that you need. So let's take the volume hiring as an example. If you're trying to provide you know, something of a concierge experience to tens of thousands of people, you're going to need to use a platform that is going to allow you to automate that in a way that is still personalized. Because often with volume hiring, and I'm making some kind of assumptions here, but with volume hiring, a lot of those people do actually tend to be your customers. So providing that great experience is even more important in that instance. So I know that when Vodafone did a massive hiring drive 5 or 6, 10 years ago or so, and this is you know, an old wives' tale, so I can't necessarily verify the 100% truth of it, but they found that their customers dropped, you know, and they were losing revenue, and it was because they were interviewing so many people and those people had such a bad experience.
No, I've heard that as well. I've got no stats or specifics, but it's something I've definitely heard as well. It's one of those industry rumours, isn't it, and stories, but enough people have told me now that I'm starting to believe it must be true. So our very last question, and thanks for the great answers so far, and to the audience for the great questions. What advice would you give to someone who's right at the beginning of their recruitment career? So they're 3 months in. It's quite open-ended. You know, how long is a piece of string is to a certain extent the answer to that one. But I'm guessing where should he or she? Actually, apologies, it's definitely a she. Where should she focus her efforts in terms of learning and to make sure that she becomes a really rounded recruiter further down the line?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing, and this is something that's true of, you know, any position that you start in, be it recruiting, marketing, sales, I think the first thing is it's important to try and take on as much challenging work, as many projects that kind of really stretch you as possible, because that's the quickest way to grow. I think when it comes to more kind of specific recruiting learning, I would always advocate for trying to be at the bleeding edge and understand kind of where the industry is going, and trying to kind of build out not only around a skill set, but a skill set that's going to help you not just now, but in 5 years when, you know, recruiting looks very different, maybe looks a lot more like sales and marketing. So, you know, Alan, going back to your question earlier, or the question earlier around, you know, taking marketing certifications, you know, maybe that's something that's worth looking at. it's important to kind of build those rounded skills.
Exactly. And of course, who wouldn't want to keep watching ChatTalent and ChatTalent webinars? That's one great way of keeping up to date and getting the chance to speak to people like you, Ben.
Exactly. That's the most important one, actually.
So, listen, thank you very much. We've come to an end now, Ben. Whether you've got any closing remarks or not, I just want to say, as ever, thank you to the audience for turning up. Your questions this week have been fantastic, and unusually, partly because Ben was so efficient with the speaking bit at the beginning, we actually managed to get through all of those. So I'm sure everyone will be delighted that they've had a personal response. Anything you want to say in closing, Ben?
No, nothing from me. Just thanks everyone for coming. And then if anyone has any kind of follow-up questions or wants to learn a little bit more around Beamery and kind of ways that we can help with some of this, my email is ben@beamery.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can track me down there as well. So if you do have questions, I'm always happy to help.
And we will follow up with everybody with a recording of the webinar, and we'll also send out your slides, Ben, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off now. Thanks again, and we'll see you some of you will see you in a couple of days' time for the event on Friday. Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, guys.